Hello, this is Miss Kyler, and today I'm going to talk to you about this concept, pursuit of the sublime, what that really means to the Romantics. And also, we're going to talk about that in conjunction with the Lucy poems by William Wordsworth, written in 1799. And I think this is a beautiful image, just showing you his love of nature and just the whole idea of untamed nature, untouched by human hands, wild and yet beautiful. So let's understand what is the pursuit of the sublime. And to do that, we'll look at some phrases that meant sublime to the Romantics. It's standing at the edge of the world. It's being that small little speck on the world, looking out on the grandeur and the immensity before you. It's reaching into the gates of heaven up from the gates of hell. It's finding peace in the midst of nature's fury. It's experiencing awe of a wild, untamed, but wondrous nature. And as you see, those trees are untouched by human hands. They're growing, they're tangled. But you're sitting there saying, this is creation at its finest. And I can be a part of that. It's the magical mystery of the moon. To the Romantics, nothing is just the moon or just a mountain. It's magical, it's mysterious, it's awe-inspiring. Staring in awe at the dancing daffodils. Wordsworth actually wrote a whole poem all about daffodils and the detail that he goes into, just glorying in the natural movement of the daffodils in the breeze. Actually, this is the excerpt that Dorothy Wordsworth, his sister, wrote. And Wordsworth lived with his sister before and during his marriage. And just to note that at that time, unmarried women often stayed with a brother or father. Women weren't supposed to stay alone because they needed someone to support them. And Dorothy Wordsworth kept a daily journal, and this journal reveals the love and fascination the Romantic poets had with the simple beauties and rugged upheavals of nature. It's just really fascinating to follow how she describes a day and how much detail she puts in that and how that inspired Wordsworth's poetry. Okay? So here we have a little excerpt from the journal. She says, "The wind was furious, the lake was rough. When we were in the woods beyond Galbarrow Park, we saw a few daffodils close to the waterside. We fancied that the lake had floated the seeds ashore, and that the little colony had so sprung up. But as we went along, there were more and yet more, and at last under the boughs of the trees we saw that there was a long belt of them along the shore, about the breadth of a country turnpike road. I never saw daffodils so beautiful. They grew among the mossy stones about them. Some rested their heads upon these stones as on a pillow for weariness, and the rest tossed and reeled and danced and seemed as if they were verily laughed with the wind that blew upon them over the lake. They looked so gay, ever glancing, ever changing. This wind blew directly over the lake to them. There was here and there a little knot, and a few stragglers, a few yards higher up, but they were so few as not to disturb the simplicity and unity of life of that one busy highway. Rain came on, we were wet." So we see her, them actually exploring and looking at detail and just having a great time enjoying nature and the details of nature. It's like we could spend all day looking at one bug and just be marvelous at how that bug is a part of the plan of nature. So some of the famous works that Wordsworth did were the Lucy poems. He wrote this collection in 1799, and he wrote it while he and his sister were in Germany, homesick for England. At that time, they found it judicial to go to Germany because it would be less expensive, and they could get some cultural experience, learn how to speak German. And so it was judicial for them to travel. Also, it was educational for them to travel. But while they were away, they were very homesick for England. England to them, that the daffodils, the nature, the hills, everything that was about the countryside that they loved. Now, one of the questions that is raised a lot is, who is Lucy? So this Lucy is a topic of all these poems that I've included in the lesson, but who is Lucy? Some say Lucy is possibly an unknown lover that Wordsworth had, but most agree that Lucy is a symbol of the disappearing countryside in England, part of that mutability, the changing the losing of the loved one, which is England, as he knows it. So one of the poems that he wrote is Strange Fits of Passion Have I Known. And so you see the poem there. It's strange fits of passion have I known, and I will dare to tell, but in the lover's ear alone what once to me befell, and so forth. And he's telling a story of what happened. Okay. Now the format is a lyrical ballad, so we recognize that it's telling a story, it's in quatrains, and it actually has somewhat of a tragic tone. The poem exemplifies the pursuit of the sublime sought after by the Romantics. As you read it, watch the juxtaposition of the three elements, the moon, the cottage, and the horse, and see how all of these together suggest a race against time, the movement, the relative movement of the moon, the cottage, and the horse, and how they're converging. Okay, so here we have two stories. We have a dream about racing home to see a loved one before it may be too late, but on another side we have the idea that he's fearful that England's countryside will be taken over by the towns and all that he once loved will be gone when he returns from Germany. So here we have at the very beginning a quandary. He's telling, is he telling this only to his lover? Is it telling to Lucy? And yet, it's about Lucy. So who is he talking to? It says, strange fits of passion have I known, and I will dare to tell, but in the lover's ear alone what once to me befell. So is he talking to Lucy, saying, Lucy, look at how silly I once thought you might be dead when I found you? Or is he talking to somebody else about a past love? Or is he telling someone about, I'm only going to tell you how I really feel about England? Now in the third stanza, that's where he first mentions the moon, and we see how he's journeying toward her, the moon above. Upon the moon I fixed my eye. And you notice that the moon is having a mystic, hypnotic effect. It is a fixed point in a rapidly changing scheme. Again, that's suggesting mutability, the idea of change and upheaval, and having to adjust to that change and upheaval, to be flexible enough to go to the extremes that life may take us. And the horse is moving, the landscape is changing, but the moon is a fixed point. And it's ironic since often the moon is a symbol of change with its many phases. It's the inconstant moon, as Shakespeare would call it. Now in the fourth stanza, and he says, and now we reached the orchard plot, and as we climbed the hill, the sinking moon to Lucy's cot came nearer and nearer still. So he's got his eye fixed on that moon, and yet it's like the moon is moving toward him. Do you see that? He's moving towards the moon, and the moon is coming towards him. So it's all that relativity stuff, right? We're moving towards the moon, and yet the moon is sinking, and at the same time it looks like it's getting closer to our destination. Okay, and then also the idea that the moon is sinking, and he is feeling further away from her as the moon seems to come closer to her. So it's pretty interesting. And later on, he continues to be transfixed by the moon. In one of those sweet dreams I slept. And it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like he's sort of waking, sleeping. It's in that nightmarish middle ground between waking and sleeping. And he's in a hypnotic spell. He's watching as the moon descends, and some people have thought the moon is symbolic of Lucy dying. That Lucy and the moon are often linked together. And he's galloping toward the cottage, moving forward constantly. So again, all that constant do-do-do-do-do-do. My horse moved on, hoof after hoof, he raised and never stopped. When down behind the cottage roof, at once the bright moon dropped. It's just like a heavy weight. All of a sudden, that moon that he's been watching, all of a sudden, blump. Just like your whole heart sinking really fast. It's just like, this is it. And that could also mean that, she's gone. She's dead. England's gone. My hopes are gone. What does that mean? It could mean a lot of different things. When he says fond, because what fond and wayward thoughts will slide, he's talking about foolish. This is just the silly things that lovers think about. And that one of that is, oh mercy to myself, I cried, if Lucy should be dead. When I come back, when I get there, all of a sudden I realize I was too late. Okay? So in another version of this poem, he actually added lines where he and his lover are laughing at his moment of fear. And we looked back and said, ha 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 ha, sort of thing. And yet, he chose to leave that out and leave it off with the words, if Lucy should be dead. So it leaves off creepy and uncertain And it's probably the way Wordsworth felt, wondering if England would still be thriving when he returned from Germany. Now here's my own craziness, and I put this here on purpose because we can look at a poem and we can say, okay, this is what it means. This is how I interpret it, or this is how other people have interpreted it. But it's even more interesting when you look at it and come up with something weird and original, but you can support it. And one night I was looking at the poem, and this is, pretty crazy. My own my foolishness here is my own craziness. So I think it may also actually be a werewolf story. That the moon transforms Wordsworth, or the speaker, into a werewolf, and he, while under the spell of the moon, slays Lucy. Werewolves, they change and they kill sometimes the one they love, and upon returning to human form is shocked to find her gone. So once the moon sinks, he returns to human form, and he was not aware of what he was doing at the time, and he regrets it, like many werewolves do. So it makes sense, right? It can be spooky, and that would explain the moon and the creepiness, the moon sinking, and his not being aware of what's happening with her, or thinking, oh dear, what have I done? Now, is that the only way to translate it? No, there's different interpretations, but I want you to feel free to think up new and original interpretations as you are exploring these poems. Okay? Thank you so much for joining me, and I wish you all well. Thank you.